Welcome to Bound by Books. I am one of your hosts, writer Danielle Bannister, and I'm joined today by fellow writer Tina Moss. Welcome,
Tina. Hello. How are you, Danielle?
I am doing fantabulous today. How about you?
Awesome. I'm doing okay. I think the day of this broadcast, Alien's Temptation might be coming out or very close to release. Yay! So that's book 3 in the series. I'm super excited. Yay! Yeah, I'm going strong. I
have to say, I'm this close from finishing Aliens Captive.
Hey.
I have an issue where I read at night because I think that's my most productive time to read, and I read for like a minute or two, and then I go,
and then you're out.
Tired.
Yep.
So I have to like not read at night. So I'm just gonna find another place. But I'm just gonna say this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
It vibrates.
Well, they're aliens, Danielle, and written for her pleasure, basically. It does.
Right, that's all I had to say. That should sell it right there.
There
right?
You go. Vibrating aliens. We'll just,
That's the review.
Vibrating aliens. I kind of want to put that now as like, the tagline. Forget the series name. The series name is now Vibrating Aliens. Done. I will be able to put ads
Curious about aliens? It vibrates.
Oh my god, you're too funny.
Oh, I guess I'm a little punchy today.
All right. Where's volume 3 for you? When does that come out?
Volume 3 is coming out in early August.
So soon.
Yes. Yes, I'm actually writing volume 4 right now, so I'm trying to be ahead of myself. And then there will be a little lull because I'm planning on releasing another novel that's been very, very patiently waiting its turn to be released.
Which one is that?
And that one is I haven't actually released the title or any
of
that
boo.
stuff. I like to do it with a cover reveal. I'm weird that way. But this one is a book that I wrote with a fellow local Maine playwright.
Oh, nice.
And he wrote the script that the actors in this particular book are rehearsing.
Oh, that's cool.
So he wrote something very specific for what I needed my characters to do, the arc that they needed to learn.
That's awesome.
He sort of wrote so we both got something out of this collaboration, and I've been telling him it's coming out. I promise, I promise, and I just keep pushing it off because I had this series, and So just to sort of appease that, get that done, that's going to happen, and then volumes 4 and 5 will come out early next year. So there's a plan. I have a plan.
I know you do.
It's not the best plan, but it's a plan. Today we are going to be talking about morally gray characters. What does it mean when it's our hero, the love interest, the antagonist, whatever? If they're morally gray, we're going to talk about it. That's kind of up for it. But I think before maybe we dive in too deep to this topic, I like to help to sort of define things so that, anybody who maybe is like, well, I guess a moral gray character, what does that mean? That they're pale and pasty and need a little
gray
sun?
skin.
Yeah. What does that mean? Well, how would you describe what a morally gray character is?
I actually think that morally gray characters are probably the most human, because if you think about like our classic hero or our classic villain, it's very black and white thinking, very all or nothing mentality. So it's usually in the hero's journey story, it's a very good, upstanding, chosen one, usually from a disenfranchised background or poverty or something. They're not usually the character that's going to be automatically the hero out of the gate. They've come from nothing essentially and rise in terms of being a hero, but they're usually always good, right? We're talking about classic
at their core. Yes, they might do things that you might not agree with, that might be questioning either ethically or legally or spiritually, whatever. It might be on the sort of a line, but ultimately they are
good.
Decent people.
Right. They're all good.
Core.
Or you have on the flip side of that, again, the true classic hero model, the all powerful, all strong, all encompassing, just true good guy. Like not going to do any wrong type thing, right? There's kind of two folds.
Captain America.
Yeah, but they're very
That's
very black and white thinking. Right. This is it must always be this way, for this is the only good way, right? This is the right
a very
path.
two-dimensional villain.
Yes.
It's all this, it's so the gray
all
is
bad.
Sort of in the middle there. There's some good, there's some bad. It's
exactly. And I think when I think of classic like moral gray characters that I could draw from it, and again use as an analogy because that's my favorite thing, Spike from Buffy. Spike from Buffy is my ultimate morally gray. And some people will say Angel to an extent, that Angel just comes off as too good to me. He's just so good. He's just so good. He's so good all the time. Spike is not.
Right.
Spike is very, very morally gray.
Right.
And for those not familiar with the show, a morally gray character again is going to either do the wrong thing for the right reasons or the right thing for the wrong reasons. There is no black and white thinking. There is no this is the only way, this is the righteous path, or this is all evil and this is bad intentions. And usually morally gray characters are very appealing because they are so three-dimensional, because we there's a part of us that can understand where they're coming from, especially if the writing is good.
Right. Another good example might be Lucifer.
Mm-hmm.
The literal devil
it was supposed to be
a morally gray character because sometimes you agree with him. So I mean, you would think a character like Lucifer would be all evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's the devil. But if you write it different, you get a morally gray character who is far more interesting and compelling, and you want to read more, watch more, learn more to find out what makes them tick.
Exactly.
Because I think that's something that's human in us, is that we want to understand how people think. We want to understand why people do things, when they do things. And if we can sort of figure it out, we can have empathy for them and we can, relate to them. But if they're all one thing or another,
then it's very hard to relate.
It's very hard to relate, right? Because we're not all one or another. We're diverse.
Exactly.
A diverse people.
Exactly.
So is there in maybe well, you mentioned one, but are there others that you can think of maybe in a book, or maybe even one that you've written that you would consider morally gray, and sort of what makes either what makes them morally gray to you, or what readers might think make them morally gray?
Yeah. So the biggest morally gray character I have would be in A Touch of Darkness that I wrote with my co-author many years ago. That book, it plays on the idea of humanity, angels, demons, fallen angels. So some of those mythos. But the evilest, quote unquote, characters in the book are actually the humans. And the morally gray character is the bad guy, who it's hard to go into without giving away all of the plot, but essentially he was the most fun to write because he did all of these quote unquote evil things, bad things, for a really essentially noble reason, right? And it had to do with his daughter and taking care of his daughter and making sure that she was okay. In his mind, whatever that meant. Sometimes that means different things, and they're not always so great things. But yeah, that was a definite example. The sci-fi series that I'm writing now is not so much morally gray, but my aliens do lose their emotions, which can create this gray area, right? Sure. And they're technically the good guys, and they come at it from a good perspective, but there are instances where you're like, I'm not so sure about that. The motives might be good, but the actions are questionable. So I think there's a lot of room when creating morally gray characters, just like there's so many shades of gray. hence and not the book. There's so many shades of gray. You can kind of have a range of different morally gray characters. What about you? Have you written? I know you have, but which ones have you
yeah, probably the most obvious example would be Girl on Fire. There are people, I think, would categorize the main character Sarah as being morally gray because she happens to be a pyromaniac, and you know that's a little morally gray.
Little gray.
That's a little morally gray. But I think that the things that humanize her is sort of the reasons why, right? That what is happening that leads somebody to pyromania, what's going on in their lives, to sort of not necessarily justify it, but to give you the right, I get it. I might not do the same thing, but I get what you're doing.
Coming from.
I understand where you're coming from. And then in that same story, there's also another character who is very all sort of evil, right? Because we don't ever get to dive in to that headspace.
I would want to dive into that headspace.
I don't want to dive into that headspace either. That's why I didn't write it. But you know, I think that sometimes headspace like that, we just don't know the answers to why people do things. Even if we want them, we never get to figure that out. So I'm like, I already have one sort of morally gray character. I didn't want to muddy the waters. I wanted this to be her story.
Right.
I didn't want it to be this other character's story. And so that I just kind of left off the page, and you can create your own reasons or justifications, or just leave it be as it is. But I think that sometimes too is you have to maybe be careful with how much morally gray characters you put, because I think then you might lose some of that.
That's a good point. Yeah, in a Touch of Darkness, the character who's morally gray is juxtaposed to a character who it comes across as very evil, like not a lot of redeeming qualities. And I do think there is something to that, right? Because it's almost as if you could see by putting them against each other, where one is morally gray and one is very clearly like evil, in the evil sense. It makes the morally gray character more empathetic. And that was kind of one of your questions, like, how do you make morally gray characters empathetic, right? I think for you with Girl on Fire, she's extremely empathetic, extremely relatable right away, even though she's presented as a character that has a lot of experiences that hopefully these people, most people haven't experienced some really traumatic events in her life, but she comes across as so just like, I feel everything she feels throughout the book, which is a testament to you and your writing. But how do you feel that in writing her, or any characters that you have that are morally gray, how do you make them empathetic? How do you make the reader connect with them?
Well, it's you have to sort of dance in their headspace, and you have to be okay with putting the emotion on the page, even if it's unflattering, even if it might be too similar maybe to just something that you're feeling or something you felt before. If it's true for the character, you've got to let it live and breathe on the page, even if it might be uncomfortable. That was a huge thing writing this book. This was the first time I had ever written anything sort of dark on the page before. Up until then, I had written very light romances and rom-coms. So this was a completely different, for a long time, I wasn't sure I could publish this book because it was so different to anything else that I had written. I was scared to write it. I was like, no, I can't write this. This isn't what I do.
Right.
And if I had tried to, write it before I was in my right lane, I probably never would have written it. But, it's one of those instances where I decided to let the character just, you go where you need to go and I'll follow, and then we can edit it out later. But I remember there was a very certain scene that happened, and that's when I knew where the book was going. I went, no, you want to go that way? no, I can't go that way. Can I? Can I? And I just decided to just trust the book and let it do its thing. And just to be honest with whatever this character is experiencing and not sort of filtering myself, trying to get that inner editor out of the way and just let the character tell the story.
So you focus a lot on authenticity to that character and presenting them in the most genuine and human way, because let's face it, humans are not black and white creatures. We are very rarely, all good or all evil. We have a lot of facets to our personality. So
getting inside a character's head, I mean, that's one way I think to really connect a reader, is if we can understand what the character is thinking, we can connect and get in there and empathize so much quicker if we're allowed access in here. If we're always like this at a standoff and we're never allowed inside, we're only hearing what the character does or seeing physically what they do, but we never get to hear what they're thinking, it makes it really hard to make that connection.
Right.
So you've got to be willing to open up the brain and let's see what's inside. And I think that can be challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Which is actually a good point. Do you think that morally gray characters have to be empathetic?
Well, so I'm also an actor. Okay, so I think this ties into this. Playing a bad guy, say, is boring. Playing a bad guy is boring. You have to, as the actor, the only way to make them interesting to play and interesting to watch is to make sure that the backstory, even if it only exists in your mind, validates the things that they're doing. They're not evil just because they're evil.
Right.
They have a reason for doing the thing. Even if you never see it on the page or on the stage, there was a reason, there was a motivation. So I think that it comes down to, there has to be empathy toward your morally gray characters, or you don't have a morally gray character, you have an all evil character. Yeah. So if your intent is to write a morally gray character, you also have to validate the reasons. They don't have to be right in their validation, but you have to, like, a prime example of this would be Joe from the series You. He is not a good human.
Nope.
He is not a good human being. And yet. We root for him. We want him to succeed. We don't want him to get caught.
It's true.
What?
It's true.
Because we see the validation from his point of view, which is messed up. It's not right. But because we can see the validation, we're rooting for the sake of it.
Yep.
So, I mean, yeah. I think that there has to be some empathy there. Or at least some validation.
I think it's even, so I love the show You. If you haven't watched You, I mean, what are you doing with your life? You need to. You need to watch it. But
it's so bad, it's good.
It's so bad, it's good. Exactly. But before that, of course, we had Dexter, right? And I always compare Dexter and You because it's a similar premise. It's a similar storyline. The difference for me is Dexter's morally gray, his moral compass essentially was skewed, right? So his father, and if you haven't watched Dexter by now, I'm sorry, I can't give you spoilers for Dexter.
It's been a while.
Go watch Dexter. But his father essentially, put that moral compass that was skewed onto a path that could be understood. Right? Not saying it's right, not saying that the things he did were right, but he did it to be like, essentially he became like a vigilante. He became someone who was going to get rid of these bad people. So you understood that even a little more than you do with Joe and You, because Joe, his moral compass isn't skewed. He doesn't have a moral compass. His worldview is completely off base. Now, of course, he has reasons for everything he does and motivations, and you're like, oh, okay, I can see where you're coming from. And then you're catching yourself like, wait a minute, no, I can't. What are you talking about? You're insane. Like, that's insane, right? Exactly. So I think it takes where Dexter started to an even further extreme of like, this is a clearly warped worldview. How are we going to make people buy into this and empathize with him?
Yeah. And you're in his head.
Yes.
A lot. A lot. So you know what he's thinking all the time. And that only endears you to him more. Why do I like you?
Right. I think it's also this idea of where with Dexter, it came from this like impulsive drive, this almost primal need to have to act in this way. And then it was just the action was put on a criminal, it put on a bad guy. So it was essentially vigilantism. Whereas with Joe in You, it's from this like, but he does it because he loves them, because he's a romantic at heart, and he's, you know, he reads all the time, because I mean, what book lover doesn't love a guy who is gonna read and know really great books? You know what I'm saying? So there's almost this romantic quality to Joe that's, you know, the classic kind of hero. Or better yet, he's not an alpha male at all. He's actually very beta, and then all of a sudden comes out with these like very alpha-esque actions. So there's some type of appeal to that, right? There's some type of primal appeal to that from a, you know, if you're attracted to the classical male hero, there's something to that. So I think his moral ambiguity is even more appealing in specifically the romance writer sense, right? Whereas Dexter is probably more psychological thriller. You is very much like, oh, this is weirdly romantic.
It's definitely got the subgenre of romance in there. It's absolutely, Like, so that's an interesting. All right, so an interesting segue, especially when thinking about You. Do morally gray characters such as Joe? Is there a line that they cross and you go, okay, that's it, I'm out, I can't root for you anymore, we're done here? Or is it, as long as it's justified, as long as we understand your motivations, I'm in for the ride?
I mean, I hope there's a line, because otherwise, what does that say about me?
I know, right? So far, there hasn't been with the You series, and that worries me.
I really hope there's a line. I would think the big triggers that would trigger most people, that most people will be like, oh my God, that's a trigger warning. You know, any type of child abuse, or, you know, extreme kind of things, where you go, okay, there it is, that's the line. And I think they're very good at like sometimes putting a little toe on that line, or being very close to things that would be considered out there. And then pulling back and then being like, no, haha, gotcha. That's not how we're gonna go.
Now, Joe, don't you know him by now?
Oh, Joe would never.
It's quite a brilliantly written character.
It is
just from it's just how do you root for somebody so awful? It's just if you ever want a masterclass in morally gray characters.
Oh my God. But that's a great question too. Like, what is this attraction to morally gray characters? Like, why do we want to root for them? Why are we sitting here watching somebody who's essentially a psychopath or a sociopath? I forget which one, but he's definitely one of them. Why are we rooting for him? Why are we going?
I think it's sociopath. I think sociopath because they can socialize and interact.
Yes.
Normal. I think that's what it is. But I'll tell you the answer. You won't like it, but I'll tell you the answer. It's because we think we can fix them.
Oh, now we're getting deep, Danielle. It might be a whole other podcast.
We can make it better.
We can fix the broken.
They just haven't met us yet.
Oh boy, that's going deep into my psyche today.
That's going deep. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. It's the same attraction to, you know, an alpha bad boy, or why bully romance is an extremely popular subgenre.
Absolutely.
Right? There's something to that appeal of like, he's like this for everyone but me.
Yeah. It's a thing. It's not just a trope, it's a thing. So what is the difference then between a morally gray character and a morally bankrupt character.
Ooh. Ooh. Oh, I don't know.
I think for me, maybe that the definition would be that there is no redemption. That that they are not interested in redemption. They don't want they are the compass is gone. The compass has left the building. It's a self-serving, only thinking about themselves sort of thing. And
well, let's take a for instance then, because we're both Marvel geeks, and we can't go a podcast without talking about something in Marvel. Thanos for me is hugely morally gray, where some people will just say, oh no, he's just an evil character.
No, he's morally gray. Absolutely morally gray.
Huge, because his motivations are essentially self-sacrificing. He's giving up, the things that are most important to him, his life and his livelihood, to go do this thing that he believes is going to benefit the universe. Yes, it's wiping out half the population, but there's reasons. There's reasons.
It doesn't have to be right, but there's a reason.
Exactly. And in his mind, it's a reason that is so justified that he's willing to make these major sacrifices. Because let's not discount that. He goes through some pretty intense stuff to get to his end goal. So I think in that sense, that moral bankruptcy, but here's the kicker, right? He doesn't want redemption because he believes in his cause. He believes that he's right. Even, at the end, when he's meeting the consequences of his actions, he's still 100% all in with his point of view. Absolutely. So is he morally bankrupt?
No, I think he is morally gray because he has beliefs and he's going with them. But he has reasons.
It's a tough one. Though, because there is no redemption arc for him, or not one that's written yet in the MCU. No. Maybe someday, but there is no
What If. You watch What If, there's a
gotta get to What If.
Little nod to it. I don't know if it's redemption, but it's an interesting take. Trying to think of who would a morally bankrupt character.
Oh, I think I got one. Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter, I would say, is morally bankrupt. He again can come off morally gray, and we're talking someone who is definitely the pinnacle of evil in a moral society, right? He kills people and he eats them. Like, what could be more morally, corrupt than that? The bankrupt, I think, comes apart as in terms of, instead of the morally gray, is that his reasons are questionable and changeable. So his motivations are not always the same. And he's not like Dexter. He's not just killing off the bad guys. He's not doing this just for Clarice, although that's something that he's said before in the books and in the movie. But it's clear that that's not his reason. So there's a disconnect between what we're presented as his motivation, what his motivations are, and the changing nature of them. So he's not sticking to any code. There is no code for him.
And yet that character, who is morally bankrupt, is still a compelling character.
Very.
So it's not that if you have a morally bankrupt character, they can't be an engaging character and somebody that you're both horrified to be reading about and yet can't turn away from. I guess there's a very thin line between writing a morally bankrupt character and a two-dimensional evil character.
Well, I'll give you an example, two-dimensional evil character, Emperor Palpatine. And I don't care if I'm a Star Wars fan. I don't care if you come for me for that.
I would
there
agree
is
with
nothing.
that. Yeah.
There's nothing there to make him three-dimensional, morally gray. In my mind, he's just evil.
Right.
And pretty boring.
And that, I think that comes down to, and I don't know, maybe it's different in the books and the source material, but in terms of what we've seen, there's been nothing written to give him anything except for evil lines, evil actions. There's no sort of backstory, nothing. So I guess that's sort of what you should be careful of when you're writing, is that if you're writing an evil character, which is, there's nothing wrong with writing an evil character, just make sure that they're not flat, that you're giving them some of those
substance. I think if you're
Yeah.
writing an evil character, the evil character still needs to have motivations and goals and reasons and justification for what they do. They don't have to be morally gray in the sense that you're like, oh, you feel a little bit of empathy for them, or oh, you could see where they're coming from. They could be a completely warped worldview, but there has to be some type of reason for their actions. And I know with Emperor Palpatine, people will be like, well, yeah, it was to gain power or whatever. Yeah, but it's boring. It's very like flat. There's not a lot of depth to the reasons for gaining power, right? And it doesn't
like,
have
why did he want to gain power? What was his motivations to gain power? Was he, as a child and yelled at by his parents for never succeeding or whatever? Give us something, you know? Give us a motivation.
And it doesn't even need to be like, because that could essentially make them morally gray then, right? Because now we empathize with their traumatic background and we understand where they're coming from. It doesn't even have to be that. It can be, a different type of reason, like maybe they're born a narcissist, maybe there is some type of other underlying factors that are motivating them to do this. But there has to be something. It can't just be like, well, I'm evil and therefore I want power.
Right.
That's boring.
Right.
It's boring to read. It's boring to write, honestly.
Yes. It's boring to watch. It's just boring.
It's boring all the way around.
Avoid boring in your writing. Pro tips.
Pro tip: avoid boring. Don't be boring.
If it's boring to you when you're writing it, it's gonna be boring for the reader.
Yeah, and I think the most interesting morally gray characters are the heroes. I think when a hero is morally gray, it just makes everything more interesting because you're in that person's headspace, right? You're taking on this journey, what is essentially the hero's journey. And when that person is morally gray, or sometimes the unreliable narrator, they're called, right? But when that person is morally gray, it gives you a different lens to view things through. And it could be a pretty darkly colored lens, let's say, but it's interesting.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, if you've got your morally gray character as sort of the love interest in your romance, the only way you're going to get a peek into their head, if it's not a split point of view book, is in what they say and what they do, but never what's going on in here. And that's really where the reader is going to connect, is what are they thinking?
Yeah,
I would love what are their actions doing, but what are they thinking?
And again, I'm sorry, this is just Marvel geekdom going on, but I would love a film just all Thanos. Just give us all Thanos's point of view. We get a little bit of it, but like just all Thanos's point of view of, just like creating that whole journey to get to where he went. Oh man, that would be amazing. Something like that. Again, because it's taking essentially the villain, quote unquote, and making them into the hero and telling their story from their point of view. Totally cool.
Well,
did we do
I think we might have exhausted the topic of morally gray characters. Now you know how to write them.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. And tell us, in the comments below on YouTube, who is your favorite morally gray character? It can be from your own writing or from a book or TV or movie that you love. We'd love to hear about it and talk more with you.
We'll see you next time on Bye Bye Books.
Yay. Bye.
Wait, before you go, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check us out on our website, boundbybookspodcast.com.